The wind howled outside Mark's small, dimly lit living room, rattling the windows as if it were desperate to get in. It was a cold autumn night, and the five friends, Mark, Julia, Sam, Lisa, and Derek, had gathered together for the first time in what felt like years. The mood was light, filled with laughter and reminiscing about the past. However, beneath the laughter, there was an unspoken heaviness in the air, an absence they all felt but avoided mentioning. David. David had died almost a year ago in a terrible accident. The details of what happened were never fully clear, and that uncertainty had lingered in their minds like a nagging splinter. David had been a part of their group since childhood, and his sudden passing had left a hole in their lives that none of them could fill. But tonight wasn't supposed to be about sorrow. It was a reunion, a chance to reconnect and remember the good times. That was, until Mark's phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting the conversation. Mark absent-mindedly picked it up, expecting a random text or email. But the moment he saw the screen, his heart stopped. "What's up?" Julia asked, noticing the color drain from his face. Mark didn't respond immediately, staring at his phone with wide eyes. It's David's number," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. Everyone froze. David's number? That was impossible. David had been dead for nearly a year. His phone had been shut off. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe someone got his old phone number, Derek suggested cautiously, though his voice lacked conviction. "No," Mark muttered. "I never deleted it from my contacts. It's the same number." He hesitated for a moment, then opened the voicemail. Static crackled through the speaker, followed by a familiar voice, David's voice. It was unmistakable. "Help me." The room went deadly silent as David's voice continued, weak and distorted, but clear enough for all of them to recognize. I'm not where they said. Please help me. I'm still here." The message ended abruptly with a sharp click, leaving the room in a suffocating silence. They sat there, staring at each other, as if trying to process the impossible. "That can't be real," Sam finally said, his voice trembling. "David's gone. We were at his funeral." "Who would do something like this?" Lisa whispered, her face pale with shock. "Why would someone use his phone to send us something like that?" Mark was still staring at his phone, shaking his head. "It's not just the message," he said quietly. "There's a location attached to it." He turned the phone around, showing them a set of GPS coordinates beneath the voicemail. It was a place just outside of town, near the old quarry. "The quarry?" Julia whispered. "What the hell would David be doing out there?" "We should go," Mark said, standing up, his voice filled with determination. "No," Lisa replied quickly, shaking her head. "This is wrong. David's gone. We all know that. This is someone playing with us." "Maybe," Mark admitted. "But what if it's not? What if? What if there's something we don't know?" Dare stood up next. "We have to at least check it out. If there's even a chance this is real." The others hesitated, but ultimately agreed. There was something about the voicemail, about the sound of David's voice, that they couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a prank, it felt like a cry for help. A final plea from someone who had been ripped from their lives too soon. They piled into Derek's car and made their way toward the old quarry, the air thick with tension. None of them spoke, and the only sound in the car was the wind whipping against the windows. The road to the quarry was dark and narrow, winding through thick woods that seemed to close in around them the further they drove. When they finally arrived, the quarry was exactly as they remembered it, a massive pit surrounded by jagged rocks and overgrown with weeds. The place had always had an eerie atmosphere, a place for dares and teenage ghost stories, but tonight it felt different. The air was colder, heavier, and the wind seemed to carry an unnatural quiet. "This place always gave me the creeps," Julia muttered, stepping out of the car. Mark led the way, following the GPS coordinates on his phone. The signal pointed them toward the center of the quarry, and as they descended deeper, the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift uneasily, as though it didn't want them there. "This is it," Mark said, stopping in the middle of the clearing. "This is where the message led us." They all looked around, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just rocks, dirt, and the looming silence. "So what now?" Sam asked, his voice thick with apprehension. Before anyone could respond, a soft sound reached their ears. It was faint at first, almost like the wind, but it grew louder, a low, muffled cry like someone calling out in pain. They froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The cry came again, clearer this time. "Did you hear that?" Julia whispered, her voice shaking. "It's coming from over there," Mark said, pointing to a small mound of dirt at the edge of the clearing. They approached cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. As they got closer, they could see something sticking out of the ground, something that looked like a piece of fabric, barely visible under the dirt. Mark knelt down, brushing the dirt away with his hands, revealing more of the fabric. His heart pounded in his chest as he pulled at it, uncovering what lay beneath. A hand, cold and lifeless, sticking out of the ground. The others gasped, stepping back in horror. Mark continued to dig frantically, his hands shaking, until he uncovered a body. It was decomposed, the skin stretched tight over bone, but the tattered clothes were unmistakable. It was David. "Oh my God," Julia whispered, covering her mouth in shock. They all stood there, staring at David's body, the reality of what they had uncovered sinking in like a cold weight in their chests. David hadn't just disappeared or died in a freak accident. He had been buried here, hidden away, forgotten. "He didn't leave us," Mark said, his voice shaking. "He never left." Before anyone could speak, the air around them grew colder still, and the wind picked up, swirling around them like a storm. And then, from the darkness, they heard David's voice again, clear and desperate. "Help me!" The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, a low rumble that grew louder by the second. The earth around David's body shifted, and suddenly, something began to emerge from the dirt. A hand, not David's, but something skeletal and rotting, clawing its way up through the earth. And then another, and another. The friends screamed, stumbling back as the ground erupted with corpses. They were skeletal, their hollow eyes glowing with a sickly light, their twisted, decayed fingers reaching out toward the living. David had been the first, but he wasn't alone. As the dead closed in around them, the last thing they heard before the darkness consumed them was David's voice, whispering from the depths of the earth. "I'm still here.